My story matters because I matter. Brené Brown. I learned about the idea of both mental health and writing at a relatively young age. I was 8 when I got back from a trip to America and started developing symptoms of extreme anxiety. I was paralyzed at times on the couch or in bed, and school was a hard place to go to, even though for a long time the school that I went to was right across the road from my house. My anxiety affected every part of me. My education, my friendships, my family. My first visit to a psychiatrist was at age 9, a last resort for my mother to get me to school after threats from the principal coming to my house himself to pick me up didn't work. This was when my journey with mental health began. I want to say now that when I talk about mental health and illness, I don't want the word illness to be a dividing word. I don't want to create a you and me type of thing here, because it is not me and you, it is everyone. Everyone at some point is going to have poor mental health, maybe just for a day or a couple weeks, but everyone experiences emotions to some varying degree. It's all mental health. I use the word illness to describe when my mental health wasn't healthy. My journey with mental health has been a roller coaster. High moments of pure manic joy and low weeks of depression. But almost constantly along the ride, I have been writing as a way to cope. When I first started writing, it was just for fun. I made up short stories and I won a competition. I received copies of my book. I got to hold this world that I had created in my hand. I loved writing even before realizing how much it would help me in the future. Through all of this, I was lucky enough to have support from family and friends and therapists, and I got to a point in my life where I thought to myself, I've done it. I've recovered. A couple months later, I had my very first panic attack. I was devastated and disappointed. This anxiety had hit in such a huge way. But I had resources now, a plan with my school. I had a way to get through it. During my first couple panic attacks, I thought that I was dying every single time, even though I knew it was happening now. But this is something I feel grateful and privileged to have. Many people don't have experience with mental health or people to talk to, so when something like this happens, they can feel incredibly alone. This is the reason that I want to write about it. Even though it is hard to go back to these times in my life, to have these discussions with people who knew me at the time and had to watch me go through it, it's important to me that people know that this is okay. This is maybe even normal. 1 in 4 people experience some sort of mental illness in their life. Whether it is you or someone close to you, you can look around this room and find a handful of people who are struggling, people who are surviving, and people who are thriving despite. So I want to talk about this. I want to talk about my story, and I want to listen to other people's stories, but this kind of stuff is not easy to talk about. 9 out of 10 people with mental health problems say that stigma and discrimination have a negative effect on their lives. But why? At the start of my Greenstone, this idea to talk about mental health was always in the back of my mind, but I was too scared to say it out loud. It would mean having to admit to people that I have and still do struggle with my mental health. But I know that this is nothing to be ashamed about, so this whole idea I had was hypocritical. The stigma that I thought I was free from was the thing that was stopping me from talking about it in the first place. So I said it out loud one day. Here at school with one of my teachers, I was vulnerable, and I wasn't met with disgust or aversion that people are usually met with when trying to talk about these topics. I was supported. I was encouraged. So I started planning on interviewing people, but then realized that this was just worsening my anxiety, and to be honest, if they themselves had or were dealing with mental illness, then they probably wouldn't be enjoying it themselves. So, how do I do this without going up to someone and talking to them? Writing. Writing seemed like the solution. Writing has many benefits, especially for mental health. When dealing and going through my own treatment, it was always suggested to me. Communicating my feelings out loud was a struggle, so I was told to write down what I was feeling. I write every single day, either on my diary or online. I let myself free write whatever is on my mind. Let myself forget about making sense or grammar. Mostly, I write poetry. My poems are written through a screen of empathy, how I see the world around me and how I react to the things I see. I share my poems because I believe sharing stories is key to creating connections and empathy. I found my old diaries from when I first started writing. I found this page. I don't think anyone else feels this way. People are always telling me that there are people out there who feel exactly the same way as I do, but where are they? Who are they, and why can't I talk to them? I have so many questions. I want to talk about this so that other people who may be feeling the same way can find the answers to these questions. So, this year I shared my writing in multiple ways. At Sustainable Solutions, I printed poems along with my photography, and online, on my website, I shared a series of poems themed around mental health. For my Greenstone this year, I wrote over 60 poems. I am sharing them in a book which is available for order now. These poems talk about my experience of growing up. But as much as I encourage sharing, I know that some writing is not for sharing. Writing can be a daunting thing to go into if you are thinking the entire time of someone else reading it. But sometimes, when you read back on stuff you have written, you may be able to see how it could help someone else. When sharing my poems, I feel extremely vulnerable. I started this talk with a quote from Brené Brown, author and researcher on shame, courage, and empathy. She speaks very highly of vulnerability, of sharing your entire being and the bravery behind that. If I could, I would share with you guys 1,000,000 of her quotes today, but here is just one. Vulnerability is the birthplace of connection and the path to the feeling of worthiness. If it does not feel vulnerable, then the sharing is probably not constructive. I believe to be vulnerable is to encourage empathy. For someone to empathize with you, you have to get vulnerable, to share a piece of you, so that they can take that information and see how it feels through their eyes. You can't force someone to relate to you. You have to give them a reason. So I'm sharing my stories out into the world, giving people a chance to empathize, to learn about someone else's experience, how they move through the world. Empathy. The ability to understand and share the feelings of the other. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, said, "It means entering the private world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. It involves being sensitive, moment by moment, to the change-felt meanings which flow within this other person. It means temporarily living in the other's life without making judgments." I share my poetry to be vulnerable, but also because reading other people's stories is a large part of how I get through my hardest times. I can read about other people who feel the same feelings that I thought were so isolating. It inspired me to look at my own life and see how I could feel better. By writing and sharing our experiences, especially about mental health, then we can create connections, break the stigma, and break stigmas that discourage people from seeking help. If you take one thing from my talk today, I hope it is that there is always someone else out there who has felt the same feelings as you did. They survived. So can you. If you have, write about it. Share it, even if it's only with one person. If we all shared our stories, wrote them down and sent them out into the world, spoke the truth about our feelings, then we would be creating environments in which people would feel encouraged to seek help when they needed it, to have hope for a healthier life. We would get rid of the stigma that surrounds mental health. Today, I am sharing my story, my entire being, so that we can start creating connections, see the likeness and the hope that there is for everyone. This is the first poem that I wrote when I finally felt encouraged to write about what I was really feeling. The wind has been whipping past my ears for years now. Each night I wish for one day of silence, one day that I could look outside and think that maybe it would be okay not to feel the sun, but to just look at it. Not imagine how it would feel to soak my skin in it, give myself guilty pleasure that I do not deserve. But to just wonder if the gale switched out the sunbeams, shone themselves inside of me, when anyone finally be able to hear the screams pouring out of me. The wind was always already there to drown me out. For all those years, wrapping my ears with cotton as I prayed to feel numb, when that day did finally come, I woke up. With ears, ghosts only remained, whole body empty along with them. And that day I looked outside the window to find that the clouds had coated the sun, left only the dulled hum of possibility. This fabricated wish no one was around to hear me anyway. They had all left me long ago, the castaway on this island when my weather became threatening. This fabricated wish had only been granted to let me know that, even on my best days, I would still be white noise. This is to be my last wish, that I would wake up once more and find myself on the other side of the door, up in the sky. This time, a cloud, so that I had the permission to choose what to submerge myself in. The white noise, the sunbeams, the whipping wind, the ghosts. And each day, my ethereal being would just remain up, above the storms. Thank you.